That was embarrassing for Kyle Walker. And if they were 10 wins from 11 and not 8 defeats, he doesn't do that. He doesn't feel the need to try and get an opposing player sent off.
The thing that I can't get my head around is why they've gone from a team that won 4 titles in a row with the mentality, yet they keep disintegrating now the minute they concede a goal.
By him admitting that he's floundering and struggling to find a way out of this, are they losing a bit of confidence in the manager?
I think there's a determination there. I think it's that whole tortured genius thing, right? He's got that energy of somebody who, is constantly thinking, how do I fix this?
Tactically, I thought Ruben Amorim really got it right yesterday.
It's hard to see how it could have gone better.
The fact that he did win the derby, the fact that he did legitimise those big calls, actually gives him a little bit of kudos in the dressing room, but also means that his tenure has started, I think, in quite a good fashion.
I think it empowers him in the dressing room because it sends out a message that nobody is undroppable.
Just on Ahmad, by the way,
brilliant.
What an incredible performance.
Eric Ten Hag ignoring him for so long looks a little bit silly now, doesn't it?
He should have been sacked for that alone.
It's Premier League All Access with Kevin Hatchard, Alex Crook and me, Sam Matterface. I read this morning that the UK pubs have run dry of Guinness. Now, I know it was a good Manchester derby, but that sounds like you overindulged.
That might have been me at Sandown a couple of weeks ago, to be fair. But yeah, we did have a couple of celebratory glasses, didn't we, when we got back to your home on Sunday night. I enjoyed my afternoon at the Etihad. Well, 4 minutes of it, anyway.
Kevin, quick word on your weekend. What were you up to, and what took your fancy?
Lots of Bundesliga for me, as usual, but also covered the Manchester derby for talkSPORT's international service. And what an incredible finish. My voice is just about recovering from that climax to the game, which I thought was actually one of the most fascinating games I've done this season.
Interesting. Okay, we'll get into that in just a second. 2 people not celebrating or recovering with a warm, glowy feeling this morning are Gary O'Neill and Russell Martin. 2 good men, by the way. 2 good young English managers who have been discarded by their clubs. Yes, they had failings, and I think they probably would both admit that they made mistakes during their tenures. But also, 2 clubs who are run very badly.
I was going to say 2 managers who, for me, have been let down by the ownership. You look at Wolves over the past couple of seasons. They've become a club who sell their best players, didn't really properly invest in the summer. So I think it was always going to be a tall order for Gary O'Neill. The fans have turned on him very quickly, and a lot of them have forgotten what a good job he did to keep them in the Premier League last season. And a similar story for Russell Martin. I thought it was really classless, Southampton fans holding up banners and chanting, "We want Russell out," only a few months after that playoff final, when this is a club who don't have success at Wembley very often. There are a whole generation of fans for whom that playoff win over Leeds would have been their best day supporting Southampton. I think they have short memories, and I hope that Russell Martin and Gary O'Neill can both bounce back, because we need as many British coaches in the Premier League as we can get.
You should have seen his reaction this morning when a caller rang talkSPORT breakfast to moan that Alex Crook had been perpetrating an agenda against Russell Martin and his style of football. He nearly jumped out off his seat, actually just raised his coffee cup and went, "What? That's not right. That's not right."
It's actually the complete opposite. That ownership group also has to come under scrutiny. I think Dragan Solak, who is the overall owner, has great intentions. I'm not convinced with the people around him.
Not the funniest reaction we had this morning in Shea Matterface. It was actually quite amazing to watch Alex Crook get off an airbed just before 8 o'clock this morning.
Wow, that would have been quite something.
Do you know when you wish you had your phone on video mode? It was
like some kind of 80s comedy. That would have been.
It really was. Chevy Chase would have been proud. Anyway, it has been a rather interesting weekend, so let's get straight down to business and get stuck in to the Manchester derby. Well, this fixture doesn't usually disappoint. It nearly did. At one point, it was lagging behind Christmas markets, Paul McCartney, shopping, Disney on Ice, and a roast dinner as things to do in Manchester on Sunday. But slowly but surely, there was a late burst. And tactically, I thought Ruben Amorim really got it right yesterday. What were your views, Kev? You did the game.
Yeah, I thought it was a really big step forward for Amorim, actually, when you consider that it's about getting more control in games, when you consider it's about having spells of possession. I thought the players had structure. I thought they understood what they were trying to do. I thought they reorganised well after Mason Mount had to go off early. Ahmad, who I'm sure we're going to talk about a little bit more, sensational, always trying to affect the game, always trying to find holes in that City rearguard. It takes some bravery to actually go. I know they're playing really poorly, City, at the moment. I know the press isn't what it would normally be. But to go there and have those spells of possession and say, look, this is what we're going to do. We're going to impose ourselves on you. It's clunky. It's jerky. It's not quite where they want it to be, of course. Lots of attacks fizzling out for no apparent reason. But this is what change is all about. It takes time, and you can only learn it in games like this. But it's hard to see how it could have gone better. I'm sure we'll talk about the big decisions he made with Garnacho and Rashford, but he made bold personnel decisions. They played the football he wanted to play. A player who he's really promoted since he arrived won the game. And so he's got authority, and his football is starting to creep through.
Yeah, I mean, I think you do need a little bit of good fortune when you are a new manager coming into a job like that. And sometimes you could suggest that he has got that. But also, I think his charisma and the way he conducts himself and his clear intelligence, football intelligence, have sort of shone through, I think, in the first 7 weeks. But I think that this was sort of one of those moments. And I talk a lot about sliding doors moments. I think at half-time, when things are going wrong, there's one or two people that are starting to think to themselves, he's got this big call wrong. He's left out Rashford. He's left out Alejandro Garnacho. If they end up losing this derby with a whimper and don't come back here, then there's going to be a few questions asked about him. The fact that he did win the derby, the fact that he did legitimise those big calls, actually gives him a little bit of kudos in the dressing room, but also means that his tenure has started, I think, in quite a good fashion.
I think it empowers him in the dressing room because it sends out a message that nobody is undroppable. If they'd lost the game, I think you're right, the narrative in some of the papers this morning might have been different. I like what he said. He communicated really well when I spoke to him after the game and asked him, was he confident there'd be a positive reaction from Rashford and Garnacho? And he said there has to be because they're important players for us. But it's up to them. It's not in my hands, it's in theirs. So I thought he got his message across really well. It's only just dawned on me as Kev was speaking there about City, despite their recent travails, how difficult it is to win at the Etihad. I think I'm right in saying it's only their second defeat in all competitions in more than 50 games. So it's still a tall order. City made a couple of cataclysmic mistakes at the end, and the comments from Bernardo Silva talking about under-15s defending, I think, are valid. But United put the pressure on in that second half, having actually controlled a lot of the first half with the way they kept the ball, and you saw the diagonal balls that was sort of the trademark of Ruben Amorim Sporting there, slowly but surely creeping into United's game. So plenty of reasons to be positive, but it's about the win as much as about the performance. And if it had been 3 defeats in the Premier League in a row, as it looked to be with 86 minutes on the clock, then I think we'd be having a different conversation today.
You should have been in the press box with us, Kev, because it was quite some sight, actually, to have Alex Crook go from being a rather depressive figure for most of the afternoon, really, because I was saying to him, no, they're playing well, it's okay. They look as if they're in control. Yeah, but we're not creating anything.
It was the goal that they conceded. It was such a cheap goal.
You were upset about that as well, but you were moaning about the fact they weren't creating any chances. And then when the first penalty incident happened, it was so the blood was up and he was getting excited. And then there was that moment of sort of almost like startled deer in front of a car headlights when Ahmed seems to round the goalkeeper and put the ball in the back of the net, and he couldn't believe it. And then he couldn't contain his joy, and I thought, he's going to explode here. And I actually just had to gently just sort of suggest to him, just calm it down a little bit.
Because it could be dangerous. You don't want him flailing around a press box.
You've got Manchester City fans all around you. Just try to just repress some of those emotions, please.
I was pleased for Amorim, to be fair, because he did make the big decisions. He's trying to impose his philosophy. If United had lost, there'd be people out there, a lot of people out there willing to mock him. I like him. Again, the way he communicated post-match, the way that he's trying to get the maximum out of these players.
It's a journey. It's going to take some time. I think we all know that. Pep Guardiola, I thought, was brilliant after the match as well. And, he is a nightmare. We talk to him a lot. He's a nightmare after a game. He's very prickly.
It's worse when they
win. But he is worse when they win. And when they lose, actually, credit to him, he does front up, and he did that yesterday, and I thought it was terrific in the interviews afterwards. But he said, and I think he's right here, Kev, this is a side playing with anxiety and fear. 8 defeats in 11 games. The thing that I can't get my head around is why they've gone from a team that have won 4 titles in a row with the mentality and the thick skin of a rhino. I mean, they've been absolutely almost impenetrable mentally over the course of the 6 years that he's built, 7, 8 years he's been in charge, whatever it is now. Yet they keep disintegrating now the minute they concede a goal.
Yeah, I think it's such unusual territory for them. You know, to lose 8 in 11 has never happened before under Guardiola. And I do think all players, it doesn't matter what level they operate at, when it starts to go wrong, especially when you're not used to it, it's very, very difficult to then turn that around because that doubt creeps in. And if you look at how Guardiola's football is constructed, it's all on little details and it's all on an incredible amount of aggression and intensity. We talk about technical quality. Absolutely, that's important. He needs to have that high level of technical quality. But I go back to the Juventus game before this, and Juve are learning how to play through waves of pressure. That's what Thiago Motta wants them to do. They were incredibly good at playing through that City pressure. Why is that? It's because City are half a step slow, and that's all it needs to be. That's all it needs to be, because once you're through that press, then you're into them. I do think Guardiola has made some odd choices tactically. I know he's been without a whole host of players.
He's experimenting. He's on the job.
Yeah, he's trying to learn on the fly, right? He's trying to change things. He's trying to look at stuff. Gundogan in that holding role, it just doesn't work because they're so vulnerable in transition. I actually thought he had some good moments in this game, but he looks really vulnerable. Having Bernardo Silva, yes, he's got that kind of waspish, you know, that kind of angst about it. He wants to tackle, he wants to kind of get in there and win the ball, but that's not his best position.
No.
And so it just then spreads throughout the team. I've never seen De Bruyne play like that.
Well, this is the other question. If I said to you yesterday, name me a golden moment from a Manchester City player, or tell me, just even talk to me about a Manchester City player who did something amazing yesterday. Tell me something. I don't think any of us would just go, oh yeah, there was that moment. I mean, there was certain points in it when we were all talking, where I sat there and think to myself, was he playing? Are you sure he was playing? And you have to think about it. Not because you're being derogatory, because the impact on the game was minimal. And that, I think, is a big issue. Erling Haaland, crikey, I don't know how many times he touched the ball yesterday, but he had very, very little impact on the game. And I go back to that situation that you described there about the being half a step off it in terms of their press. I think this comes down to the fact that the squad isn't big enough, because if you go back over the course of the last 2 months and look at the players that have been injured, Akanji, Ake, Rodri, Bob, Lewis, who's suspended. Foden has been ill. I think he has a bit more of a problem that we haven't sort of quite sort of understood yet. Stones, Kevin De Bruyne, Doku, Diaz, Grealish, Savinho. That's the last 2 months, and players that have been out with injury at some spell. If you've got that many players on the sideline and you are trying to play at 100% intensity, then other players are going to get injured. They can't maintain that over time. And because of the chopping and changing, you're not going to get those patterns and those combinations that you need in order to be able to press at your very best. And I think it is just, and he admitted it actually in the press conference before the game, that they underestimated the number of players that they would need this year.
Yeah, no, I think it goes back to that summer transfer window and not regenerating the squad enough. The moment that summed it up for me, you talk about, was there a moment for a Man City player? It wasn't a positive one. It was the Kyle Walker incident with Rasmus Højlund, and I love Højlund's Instagram message about it. But
Manchester is red, violets are blue. What a brilliant performance. And the Oscar goes to...
Exactly. And that was embarrassing for Kyle Walker. And if they were 10 wins from 11 and not 8 defeats, he doesn't do that. He doesn't feel the need to try and get an opposing player sent off. So I think that probably tells you where City are at the moment. I spoke to Phil Foden after the game, and he said, actually, this might be a positive for us long term because we've not been in this situation before. If we can come out the other side, we'll learn from it. Guardiola, very candid. He said, I've lost something at this moment. I said, well, can you get it back and how quickly? And he said, I have to. I thought that was quite a frank acknowledgement from him as well. I do wonder, and you spoke about this a lot, Sam in the build-up to the game with Stuart Pearce, if some of his comments are actually having a detrimental effect on the players, because by him admitting that he's floundering and struggling to find a way out of this, are they losing a bit of confidence in the manager?
Well, I think it sort of creates a negative spiral, and Stuart was brilliant on this about 7-8 weeks ago, right at the beginning of the run, okay? So this is before Sporting Lisbon, when they lost 4-1 out in Lisbon, and we were on our way to the game, and he said to me, do you know what? I don't like the tone of the press conferences. And I said, what do you mean? He said, I feel like he's language by telling them they're tired, by telling them that maybe it's time for somebody else to win the league, by saying that we're in a bad moment, all of those things, it actually puts it into the mind of the players that that's where they are. You talk about it so much that it becomes almost like a self-perpetuating myth, really, in the end. And I've noticed that over this period, instead of trying to talk his team out of it, in fact, the one time he did try and talk his team out of it, if you remember, it was after the Liverpool game.
And he said,
we'll bounce back in front of our own fans
and they did.
On Wednesday night against Nottingham Forest. And they did that. And then again, after that, it hasn't been the same Pep Guardiola. So, he says, I don't have a defence. I'm the boss. I'm the manager. I have to find a solution. I don't find a solution. I just wonder what happens with him. We were sort of speculating. It was so wild speculation as we were walking out, having sensed the mood, having been in the tunnel last night, having been around them yesterday, that there is the atmosphere even around the Etihad was very flat yesterday. Is there a possibility that if he doesn't start pulling this plane up from what is a crash into the mountains, he is going to say, hold on, I can no longer be the captain?
Well, that's why I asked him the question. As he was walking away, he often does, he decides when the interview is over. I said, sorry, Pep, you've just said there that you're missing something. How quickly can you get it back? And I was sort of saying, are you telling us you're on the verge of resigning here? Because that was very much his demeanour and his body language. But he did say, no, I have to sort it out. But it's going to be fascinating to see how it unfolds in the next few weeks.
I think there's a determination there. I think it's that whole tortured genius thing, right? He's got that energy of somebody who, is constantly thinking, how do I fix this? It's a great challenge. And I don't think he would want to walk away from that. But you go back to his time at Barcelona, that caught people off guard. Him walking away from Barcelona when he did was a surprise. And it was upsetting for a lot of people there. They didn't see that coming. So if you look at a guy who's so intense, so demanding of himself as well as others, that has an effect. It has an effect on him. It has an effect on the players around him. I mean, you go back to the scratches on his head, the scratches on his nose after the Feyenoord game. That is not usual behaviour. It's not normal behaviour. So this is a guy who's so passionate, who's so intense, and you don't quite know where that's going to take him. The one caveat I would put on it is that the players know him by now. They know him inside out. They know how unusual he is. And that's in a good way, usually, because he sees things other people don't see. He gets results other people don't get. But we shouldn't underestimate all of the... I don't know he will deny it. I'm sure he would. But the 115 charges, all that stuff in the background... it does put doubts in your minds. What's the future of the football club?
I've been saying this.
Punishments, potentially.
You laughed me out of town when I said it the other week.
It's going to unbalance you. It's going to unbalance you because, if you don't know what the future holds, if it's not like a normal season and you're getting loads of injuries, and the Rodri thing is huge. I know it shouldn't be about one player, but the Rodri thing is enormous. Their win percentage drops, I think, from 70 to 55 when he's not there. So, oh no, it's worse than that. 77 to 50, when he's not there since the start of last season. So, that's enormous.
I think the uncertainty definitely plays a part in it. And I've been saying it for a couple of weeks, and you said to me that wasn't the case and that they're professionals and blah, 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 blah. But, we're not all big, confident alpha males like Crook. Some of us are a little bit vulnerable, and the uncertainty does affect us as human beings, doesn't it? I thought that what was more troubling was Bernardo Silva's scathing assessment, because although Pep Guardiola, and maybe half of it is the distraction technique, right, saying, I'm the problem, it's me, the old Taylor Swift song. But Bernardo Silva saying we are playing like under 15s is actually a damning indictment on the rest of the players.
Yeah, but he's right. If you look at the goals they conceded, and we mentioned it before, you highlighted Ederson as a potential problem at the start of the season. He doesn't need to come rushing off his line for the winner.
Crikey.
And the equalising goal, Nunez has had a howler with a back pass, But Ahmad actually has run out of options because he's taken himself too wide.
Yeah.
He's not going to score. And then Núñez just smashes him. So the decision-making of the players is really poor for both goals. And again, that probably tells you that their heads are a little bit scrambled. They're not used to being mortal.
I don't think it was a decision. I think he just crashed into him because he couldn't slow down. He was approaching it too fast and couldn't slow himself down. He didn't realise that Ahmad had just chopped back, and he ended up sort of almost running into him rather than trying to make a challenge, which was a real problem for him. But I think you're absolutely right. Ahmad, that had run out of options. He'd gone around the goalkeeper, and then there wasn't anything. There was no one else there.
Yeah, he's panicked though, isn't it? Right? Núñez has made the mistake, and he's panicking. He's racing back to try and rectify the error. And Sam's absolutely right. He can't stop. Just on Ahmad, by the way, Brilliant. What an incredible performance.
Eric Ten Hag ignoring him for so long looks a little bit silly now.
He should have been sacked for that alone.
Wild. Full of personality, full of pace.
Lovely kid as well. Lovely, humble guy.
Yeah.
I mean,
really good kid.
Real determination. But I think when you look at games like that and what they mean, you want people to show personality, and you want people who want the ball, not people who'll disappear in the game. And he absolutely wanted the ball. And I think his ability to play either wing back in this system or play as one of those two in behind the striker, that's the kind of guy Amorim is going to need, because you want those guys who can slot into different positions. Bruno Fernandes is one of them, can play that 10, can also play in the middle. So I think Ahmad, regardless of what he's done in the last few weeks, which has been incredible, but he's the kind of guy and the kind of personality, if you look at Amorim's history, that he absolutely would want to build that team around. So that was sensational. What I also want to know is whether when Crookie spoke to Amorim, did they do that Spider-Man thing when it's the two Spider-Men looking at each other and pointing at each other?
Pretty much.
Did they? Or did he think to himself, hello, mate? All right.
Who's the bad lookalike that they've ordered for me? Is this a PR thing? What's going on?
Interestingly, on Ahmad, he sort of, he's the kind of personality that sort of lives right, plays right, works hard, shows ethic, goes into the crowd, talks to people, makes himself available. And I think that humbleness and that sort of the way he behaves has sort of endeared himself to Amorim. The biggest challenge now that he has got is how he gets Garnacho and Rashford back into the fold, because those two players have, if you believe reports, let him down. Now, look, we're not 100% sure what happened with either of them, but we've got a very good indication of it. And the idea that you've now got to get those players back in the fold, I think is going to be maybe his biggest challenge. Not just back in the fold, but back in the fold and playing the way that he wants them to play, living how he wants them to live.
I think it'll be easier with Garnacho, because I don't think he's quite as far down the line as Rashford. But
maybe a technical infraction with Garnacho rather than a lifestyle one.
Yeah, whereas with Rashford now, this has been going on for a long time. I remember going on talkSPORT, breaking the story about him not being part of the England squad at the Euros, and I said then, I hope this is a wake-up call. But it wasn't. And, how many wake-up calls does one guy need? This is a boyhood Manchester United fan. He's come through the academy. He's the poster boy in many ways for the club. He should be living his dream. He isn't. And until he starts to make the right choices off the pitch, I don't see how he gets back in Ruben Amorim's team. And I applaud the manager. I applaud the manager for his stance, because, it's about time that somebody took Rashford to task. He's been indulged at that football club for far too long. And actually, that was Eric Ten Hag got a lot of criticism for trying to be too hard on certain players. I think he was too soft when it came to Rashford.
Okay, let's move on, because we had Sacking Sunday, and this is what happened. Well, let's start with Russell Martin and Gary O'Neill. Southampton lost 5-0 at home to Spurs, all the goals in the first half. 9 points from safety, jeered by their supporters at half-time. A rather crass banner encouraging his exit during the game. Why was it so toxic? Because it's not just this season.
No, it isn't. And, we've been here before with Southampton. Those supporters hounded Ralph Hasenhüttl out of the football club, and they ended up with Nathan Jones. So it's very much a case of be careful what you wish for. They are, in my opinion, a fickle bunch of supporters. As I say, it was only a few months ago that Russell Martin was delivering Wembley glory via the playoff final. And we all knew, and they should have known, this was going to be a difficult season, because the owners spent so much money trying to salvage them in the Premier League first time around that when it comes to PSR, they were always going to be up against the pump this summer. I know wages-wise, they couldn't compete with what Ipswich paid to Liam Delap. You wonder if they'd been able to get that deal over the line. Would it have solved their goal-scoring issues? So I do think Russell was having to operate with one hand tied behind his back. I do think it's chaotic behind the scenes. If you look at the team yesterday, and I went through this last night, 9 of the 11 that started against Tottenham in the Premier League were playing in the Championship this time last season. The 2 exceptions, 20-year-old Fernandes, who's come from the Portuguese league and looks a prospect, but isn't ready-made when it comes to the Premier League, and 18-year-old Tyler Dibbling. So I think it's difficult for any manager to be competitive. And he's not signed a new
contract yet, Tyler Dibbling.
And I don't think he will sign a new contract because I think he sees the writing on the wall for Saints. So good luck to whoever they turn to next. I'm sure Rasmus Hankerson's spreadsheet will pluck somebody out the hat, but they're down, aren't they? They're gone.
Interestingly, and I want to touch on what you just said, because Gary O'Neill was out two managers who actually did great jobs last season and have been sacked by December. You said that the Saints were a fickle fan base. Actually, I think we, as a homogenous group of football supporting public, have all become a little bit more fickle over recent years. We've become more demanding. We want greater success. We want greater level of consistency a lot quicker. So it's not just Southampton, actually, and fans are more than entitled to go to the game. They pay a lot of money now, to go and watch their football team, and they are there to expect to be entertained, but they also want a great experience and a great product. And if they think they can see things that are obviously going wrong, then they will demand change. And I think there's 2 reasons for this. Kev, tell me if I'm wrong. One, we have this sort of media narrative now where as soon as someone does something slightly wrong, it's sack them, get somebody else in. And I'm not just talking about the media, because the media is many different things, but social media in particular takes up a lot of our time now, and it's very knee-jerk and it demands an immediate reaction. And we seem to forget the good things that people have done very quickly, and we focus on the bad. There is a bit of that. Also, the other issue that I think we have is that as football becomes bigger and brighter, we want sort of the double experience, don't we? We want the entertainment and we want the winning football, and we demand a lot of our managers and players, groups of players, to get that. But we don't always understand what's going on in the background. And because we've got this now burnished PR operation where managers don't tell you the truth, where clubs don't tell you the truth, they don't do, and I'm not saying they're lying, I'm just saying they don't tell you all the stuff that's going on at the football club. They give you a sort of, a Wizard of Oz version of what's really happening. You know the story of the Wizard of Oz. He's not really a wizard. He's just sort of pretending to be one, right? And it just makes everything look great.
Spoilt it now.
I know, but you're all going to go and see Wicked, so you'll all know anyway. But the fact is that this sort of burnished PR operation gives a sort of, a sunny look on what the football club is, and people aren't told to understand or not educated to understand what's going on behind the scenes and why decisions are being made, right? So if we front it up and be honest about things early and tell people what to expect and communicate better with them, then maybe they won't be so expectant for you to deliver so quickly.
Well, I think, first of all, our job, I think, is always to try and provide context and analysis if we can. To caveat things, a team might be really struggling. Why are they struggling? Is it injuries? Is it some kind of personality clash? Is it some kind of tactical thing we can identify? I think that is, all of our jobs in the media to try and do that. The temptation is to, go for those kind of gotcha moments, those big headlines, because it generates clicks, and that's a reality of our industry, but that's a reality of life right now because social media has driven this. You're either terrible or you're brilliant, and then you're terrible, and then it changes, and nothing is in the middle. Nothing is, just okay, because that doesn't sell. That doesn't generate engagement, which is a horrible word, but it is what it is. So I do think that's our responsibility, and I think we do that quite well, I have to say. I think we always try and get under the skin of things. I think we always try and show why things are happening. We've talked about City. We've talked about those psychological things, those injuries. It's not suddenly that Guardiola's a fraud. It's not suddenly that he's terrible and this. We try and dig into that. But I think you've hit upon something there, Sam. I do think social media and the nature of it now drives a lot of these trends in society, because what is social media effectively all about? Look at me, look at my opinion. Oh, that didn't hit, that didn't get many likes or engagements or replies.
So
I'll have to
rev
go
it
a bit
up.
bolder.
Yeah.
I'll have to turn it up. And that's something I think we need to fight against in our industry to a certain extent. It's a hard thing to do, because if the next company across is doing that, turning everything up to 10 and they're getting whatever, it's really difficult. And look, it is entertainment ultimately. That's a big part of it as well. But I think with fans, there does need to be, I'm not talking about Southampton fans, I'm talking about fans in general. There has to be that acceptance. There's a contract with clubs. When they go, they spend a huge amount of money. They travel, or they're not looked after. That's a whole different show, by the way. Yeah. They're not looked after.
I agree with that.
They're not included. Totally. They're not respected.
And even when they are included, and we have this with England, right? So we have a delegation that goes away to all of the different destinations around Europe when we're traveling, whatever. And they go and we talk about, how, okay, so we're going to have this many fans, we're going to do this, we're going to stay in this place, blah, 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 blah. If you put us here, this is going to happen. If you put us here, it'll be easier to transport people. Make sure these tickets are sold in this way, blah, 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 blah. They have a massive consultation. 9 times out of 10, the authorities in those countries or UEFA completely ignore them.
Yeah.
And then there's trouble and everyone goes, well, why is there trouble? Well, because we told you if you do this and you shepherd them in this way and you treat them like this and you smash them over the head with truncheons, funnily enough, they're not going to react particularly well.
Yeah, so fans always have to have a say, right? So
absolutely.
If fans boo, I don't think it's particularly helpful for the team or the manager, but I get it. You have to have the right to do that, even if I don't always think it's appropriate, but I get it. So that's just something you have to accept at any level of football, that the fans have to have their say, because if they don't turn up, you basically haven't got a reason.
You've got to communicate with them, Kev. And
yeah, absolutely.
I'll give, and listen, you might not like it, and I don't think you do, but Sir Jim Ratcliffe sat down with the United fanzine. Andy Mitten, very well respected, voice of a lot of the fans, not the voice of the fans. There's no one voice of the fans, but he is a voice of the fans. And he is very close to a hardcore group of Manchester United supporters. He is a Manchester United supporter. By engaging with him, you at least give him context. Andy Mitten can then say, but Sir Jim, I don't like that.
Yeah.
We don't like that. This is a working class city. We don't agree with that. Sir Jim gets the feedback from someone who's sensible, and he gets his point across, and you might not like it, but at least there's communication there. And I think that is important.
100%.
But just to go back to the topic on Southampton and Wolves, it's very easy. Now, I've had this conversation with a lot of Southampton fans over the course of the season. They come up to me at games and say, why are you defending Russell Martin? We never win. The style of play is costing us. And my answer is always the same. If you sack Russell Martin, who are you going to bring in to keep this squad in the Premier League? And nobody has given me a concrete answer as yet. And it's the same at Wolves. They spoke to Graham Potter. They spoke to David Moyes. They even spoke to Carlos Corberán at West Brom, which would have been quite a controversial appointment. None of them wanted the job. They're going to go for Victor Pereira now, who's been managing in Saudi Arabia. Why is he better equipped to keep Wolves in the Premier League than Gary O'Neill was? I don't think he is the answer.
Well, either way, Wolves are struggling at the bottom of the table, and so are Southampton. Southampton 9 points from safety. Wolverhampton Wanderers have won 3 games since March. Now, I'm not sure that's all to do with Gary O'Neill. I'm not sure that all of the errors that they made on Saturday were down to him. But, look, also, again, the fan base had changed there. They didn't want Gary O'Neill. They wanted someone new. Let's see what happens once Victor Pereira comes in for Saturday's game. Who they got?
Leicester. Big game. Huge game.
Should be huge, shouldn't it? Because Leicester lost at the weekend and they desperately need points as well under Ruud van Nistelrooy. Quick look at the top of the table. Liverpool 2, Fulham 2. Liverpool played 73 minutes with 10 men. Chelsea beat Brentford by 2-1. Let's focus on that. So let's start at Anfield. Andy Robertson, any complaints over the sending off, first of all, Kev?
I can understand why it was given because of the position he's in. He is the last man, effectively. I mean, you can argue about whether Wilson's gonna get there and all that stuff, but look, I get it, and I think
It's never going to be overturned once the decision has been made.
Exactly that. So I can understand in terms of the position he's in on the field, in terms of the player, I get it. I think he was obviously discombobulated by the hefty whack he took early in the game.
From
I don't think he'd settled after that, so that's understandable. So, yeah, I get the red card. I can also understand why Liverpool was sore about the fact that Fulham finished the game with 11 as well, with that early challenge, so I get that. But I actually thought Liverpool played with remarkable intensity with 10 and intelligence as well. Thought Gravenberch again had a great game, really. How do we play with 10? How are we going to work this out? And they were still more dangerous than Fulham over the course of the game. So it's one of those, it's like the Newcastle game. It stings that you drop points from Liverpool's point of view, but you actually look at the performance and think, wow, do you know what? Came back against Newcastle a couple of times, came back against Fulham with 10 men. There's a real steel there and there's a real intensity still.
Obviously, the idea of sort of stretching their lead at the top of the table was available to Arne Slot this time around. Didn't actually materialise in that fashion, but they do have a game in hand. But although Chelsea have crept up behind them with the difference now 2 points. From the start of May, Chelsea have scored more goals, have won more games, and earned more points than any other side. So, do they have to accept now that they're in a title race and stop this nonsense of saying, no, we're not, we're too young? Or are they right to continue to play it down?
I think they'll continue to play it down. I think that's certainly Enzo Maresca's way of doing it. And why not? Ultimately, does it matter if they come out publicly and say they're in the title race? The league table tells us they are. And the reason I think they are, and we spoke about this a bit last night while we were watching the highlights of all the games, there has been a drop-off of some of the top teams. We've spoken about Manchester City. I was at the Emirates on Saturday when Arsenal really toiled against Everton's low block. I think they've regressed, certainly from open play. Liverpool have been the surprise package. I don't think anybody, even Kev, expected Arne Slot to come in and make the impact he has. But that does mean that at some point, I think they will have a wobble. And Chelsea are in a great position to capitalise. So I think it's a two-horse title race. I think Arsenal have already dropped too many points. City are clearly out the reckoning. If Liverpool don't win the league, then I think it's Chelsea's.
I think Arsenal are in it. Absolutely, I wouldn't rule them out because
they're not good enough, Kev. They don't score enough goals.
I agree about the goal scoring. I think that is an issue, but I think when you're as good out of possession as they are, the big worry I would have about them is purely the reliance on Ødegaard. Actually, that would be
unless you take him off and bring a kid on when you need a winner.
Well, there is that. But they've got to manage him. This is the thing. They can't run him into the ground because if they don't have him, that is such a drop-off from what they're capable of doing in a game. But I do still think they're in it. Chelsea, I said this last time I was on here, they are title contenders. It doesn't matter if they say they are or they're not. They've spent £1 billion on that squad. It was going to settle eventually, and they were going to end up with a lot of very good young players. So, Jackson, again, what I loved about his performance against Brentford, by the way, he has that horrible miss that looks as if he's won a raffle to play. He gets right underneath. It looks like he's, not ready for it. What a finish afterwards. And what I love about him and strikers like him, never hides, never just goes, oh, do you know what? I've missed a few. I'm done. I'm not involved.
That
in this
mentality
game.
Reminds me so much of Drogba, the way Drogba used to be. Drogba would miss his stupid chances, and he would duff ones, and then he would come up with the most magical of moments. And actually, that second goal from Jackson was excellent. It was such a good finish. It was really good.
The best strikers all go, right, I've missed X, Y, Z, I'm going to go on to the next one. At the top level, the elite ones I'm talking about, I always used to say about Lewandowski, he would miss chances in games and he'd just, right, when's the next one? Always in a position to affect the game. And they've got guys like Sancho performing really well now as well. He was always going to hit a certain level if he was involved, if he was engaged, and now he is. So I think Maresca's doing a great job. They are absolutely in this title race, no doubt about it.
Brian and Burmo did score, and Chelsea have one problem, that is they keep conceding goals. And I was watching the highlights again this morning, and even my 7-year-old turned around and said to me, why is the goalkeeper standing there? And that seems to be like a familiar sort of refrain with Chelsea. Robert Sanchez makes a brilliant save, and he did make a brilliant save high up to his left-hand side where he tipped it over the top of the crossbar. But then he has that sort of moment where he starts outside his penalty area, Brentford are on the counter-attack, and he sort of backpedals, but then comes forward. It doesn't really know where his position is. And then by the time he sort of tried to readjust, the ball's gone through his legs and into the back of the net.
Yeah, and actually, Maresca used that goal they conceded, didn't he, as a sort of to illustrate his point that they're not there
And
yet.
I think he's got
in terms of title contenders. He does have a point. And if you go back to Liverpool under Brendan Rodgers, the reason they didn't win the title is because when it came to the business end of the season, they conceded too many goals. We all remember that crazy game at Palace, Gerrard slipping up at home to Chelsea.
Started before that. I went to Carrow Road, right? They were, I think, 1-5 to win the title. It was about 4 or 5 games before the end of the season. Went to Carrow Road. They won the game 5-3, something like that. Norwich were on the verge of getting relegated. If you're going to win the title, that's not the kind of sort of, you need more control than that.
Yeah, agreed. And I think when it gets to the end of the season, if it is a 2-horse fight between Liverpool and Chelsea, I think Liverpool, with the characters in their squad, the experience, they'll have the mentality to shut up shop and win games. I think Chelsea are still going to be quite open and still concede goals.
The other thing to add in here, of course, we don't know what the effect of the Champions League is going to have on Liverpool, because they are going to reach the last 16 at least.
Get 2 weeks off.
Yeah, that's true. The irony is all the clubs wanted more games, and what are they trying to do? Avoid 2 more games. So very odd kind of irony to that. But we don't know how that's going to affect it. Chelsea, I've said this before, I think the Conference League has been perfect for them because the level of opposition is low. We know that, but it's a lovely bin for Maresca to put players in and say, right, you've been knocking on my door. Go and play this game against
bin? You can't call it a bin.
But you know what I mean? He can just go, fine, you go and play Astana or you go and play Noah or whatever. With all respect to those teams. I mean, you know, Chelsea being the Conference League, they're so far above that level. But it's been perfect because he can rotate, he can give players minutes, and then the ones that really show him in those games, do you know what? I quite like to play in the Premier League, if that's all right. Enzo Fernandez was one of those a few weeks ago. He can go, great, okay, I'll put you in the Premier League team then. Maurizio Sarri did it brilliantly when they won the Europa League. He had almost a separate team for the Europa League, and then there were guys who knocked on the door and said, look, I'm playing really well in this, can I play in the Premier League? And a few of them did. So if you get that right, then it can be really beneficial, and I think Maresca has.
Yeah, it's fascinating to see how they get on. You were at Arsenal on Saturday. Now, it's been a long time since they scored a goal from open play.
Maybe they need an open play coach. Listen, they had one good chance, really. I mean, Pickford's made 3 saves, but they were relatively regulation apart from the one to deny Saka in the second half. Everton dealt with that set-piece threat. I think Arsenal had 8 corners and Everton defended it well. And maybe that's the blueprint in how to stop Arsenal. I was surprised how quickly they ran out of ideas. The atmosphere at the Emirates was very flat. The fans were almost resigned to the fact they weren't winning on Saturday. Great credit to Everton for their concentration levels. Havertz was a bystander again. It would worry me as an Arsenal fan, the lack of creativity from open play.
Okay, big games in midweek. We've got all of the quarterfinals of the Carabao Cup on the talkSPORT network in midweek. It's Wednesday and Thursday. Join us for that. We've got loads of football in December. In fact, 50 games over December, and that doesn't mean that there is any respite. So we are full hurtling into the Christmas period now with those Carabao Cup quarterfinals. Games on Saturday and Sunday as well. And then next week, remember, Boxing Day, 10 live commentaries on talkSPORT.
Next
talkSPORT
week,
2.
crikey. Get the Christmas presents wrapped. I've done that already.
Have you?
Fair. Yeah.
Are you sure?
I have.
What did you get, Mrs.? Did you get someone to? What did you get someone to get Mrs. Crook? Because I know you didn't do it
I
yourself.
can't tell you that, can I? Because she's an avid podcast listener.
Is she really?
But let's just say Angelina from Inside Devils came in very useful.
Right.
Is
okay.
it a picture of Ruben Amorim?
It's a picture of my face on Ruben Amorim, yeah.
We've done that before with somebody else,
We
if
have.
I remember rightly. Right, Kevin, thank you very much.
Pleasure.
Speak to you soon. That's Kevin Hatchard. This is Alex Crook. We'll be back on Thursday to preview all the weekend's footballing action, building up to a massive weekend in the Premier League, including Aston Villa against Manchester City. And, whisper it quietly, if Aston Villa were to win that game, they'd go above them.